Nina stood by, feeling helpless yet horrified, as she watched Dr. Hayes ignore the young girl in urgent need. She saw the mother, filled with fear and worry, pleading for help, and she felt the frustration building up inside her. Nina had always believed that no one should be treated differently or unfairly, especially when their life was on the line. Her instincts as a nurse and as a caring human being were screaming at her to do something, and after a moment's hesitation, she decided she couldn't just stand by and watch. Nina's mind raced, and she immediately thought of Dr. Grant, a senior surgeon known not only for his skill, but for his compassion. She had seen him take on the most challenging cases and treat every single patient with respect and kindness, no matter who they were. She knew he was about to leave for the day, but she decided to take the risk. Without wasting another second, she reached for her phone and quickly dialed his number. When he answered, Nina could hear the exhaustion in his voice, but she didn't have time to ease into the conversation. She explained the situation as fast as she could, describing how critical the little girl's condition was and how Dr. Hayes had refused to help her. She knew she might be breaking some unspoken rules by going over his head, but she didn't care. This wasn't about her career or her reputation. It was about saving a life that deserved a fighting chance. Dr. Grant listened carefully, and there was a brief pause before he responded. Nina held her breath, fearing that he might decline, but then she heard him say he'd be right back. Relief flooded over her, and she whispered a quiet thank you before hanging up. She turned to the mother and gently reassured her, "Help is on the way. I promise someone's coming who will help your daughter." The mother looked at her with tears in her eyes, clinging to the hope Nina had given her. Nina couldn't help but feel a surge of determination, feeling that maybe, just maybe, things would be okay. She didn't have to wait long. Dr. Grant appeared moments later, his face serious but calm. He approached the young girl, quickly assessing her condition, his focus entirely on her. Dr. Hayes, noticing Dr. Grant, walked over with an annoyed expression. He looked at Nina, clearly displeased, then turned to Dr. Grant. "I already made my call on this. There's no point in interfering," he said, his tone cold. Dr. Grant met his gaze steadily and replied, "Every patient here deserves our best effort. She needs immediate attention." Ignoring Dr. Hayes' disapproval, he knelt beside the girl, speaking softly to her and asking the mother some quick questions. His compassion was obvious, and both Nina and the mother felt a spark of hope. Nina couldn't help but feel grateful. She had done the right thing, and in that moment, she knew Dr. Grant was exactly the kind of doctor every hospital needed. As he worked with calm precision, Nina stayed close by, ready to assist. She watched Dr. Hayes fuming quietly to himself, but she focused on helping Dr. Grant with whatever he needed. She was sure of one thing. At least today, someone had stood up for what was right. And as she looked around, she noticed the subtle nods and supportive glances from others in the room. It was a small act of courage, but it had a powerful impact, reminding everyone that true care and dedication mattered above all else. Nina watched as Dr. Grant gently examined the young girl. He spoke to her mother, asking calm questions, assuring her that he was there to help. The mother, overwhelmed with both fear and relief, clung to his every word, grateful that finally someone was willing to help her daughter. Nina felt a warmth in her chest, seeing Dr. Grant's quiet compassion in action. She knew deep down that she had made the right choice by calling him. But not everyone in the room shared her relief. Dr. Hayes stood off to the side, his expression growing more tense with every passing second. His glare fixed on Nina and Dr. Grant, clearly displeased that his decision to ignore the young girl had been challenged. Nina could feel the tension, but she chose to stay focused, helping Dr. Grant with whatever he needed, doing her best to ignore the angry doctor. As Dr. Grant examined the young girl, he quickly recognized that her condition was far more serious than anyone had realized. She needed immediate care, and there was no time to waste. Turning to the mother, he gently explained what needed to be done. "We're going to take her in right away and do everything we can," he said, his voice calm and steady. The mother nodded, tears streaming down her face as she whispered a thank you. Without hesitation, Dr. Grant instructed Nina to prepare the necessary equipment. Nina moved swiftly, gathering what he needed, grateful to be a part of something positive. She had worked with many doctors, but very few had the same compassion and dedication as Dr. Grant. Watching him work gave her a sense of purpose, and she knew she was learning from someone who truly cared about every life he touched. Meanwhile, the other nurses and staff in the room exchanged glances. They had seen Dr. Hayes' attitude before, and most of them were not surprised. But seeing Dr. Grant step in without hesitation reminded them all of why they had entered this field in the first place. It was a powerful moment, one that quietly challenged the kind of dismissive behavior they had seen too often. As Dr. Grant and Nina worked together, the tension in the room seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet focus. The young girl, though weak, seemed to relax in Dr. Grant's presence. He spoke softly to her as he checked her vitals, giving her a reassuring smile. It was clear that his gentle approach was making a difference, and Nina felt a renewed sense of hope. Dr. Hayes, meanwhile, remained silent, watching from a distance. Nina could see the discomfort in his expression, as if he knew deep down that his refusal to help had been wrong. His pride had been wounded, and he looked frustrated as Dr. Grant carried on, fully committed to helping the young girl. Nina noticed a few other staff members casting sidelong glances at Dr. Hayes, perhaps also realizing the stark contrast between him and Dr. Grant. With everything ready, Dr. Grant prepared to move the young girl to a treatment room. As they wheeled her bed down the hallway, Nina stayed by her side, gently holding the mother's hand, offering words of comfort. She felt a strong connection to this family, as if fate had placed her in their path for a reason. The mother squeezed her hand, her eyes filled with gratitude, and Nina felt a deep sense of fulfillment. In that moment, surrounded by her colleagues and the quiet strength of Dr. Grant's example, Nina felt hopeful. She knew that compassion and kindness were powerful forces, capable of breaking through even the toughest barriers. And as they continued down the hall, she held her head high, feeling proud to be part of something that truly mattered. As they reached the treatment room, Dr. Grant carefully set up everything he needed to begin treating the young girl. He continued to reassure her, keeping his voice gentle and calm. The mother watched closely, clinging to the hope that finally, someone who truly cared was looking after her daughter. Nina stayed beside them, helping with each task and watching Dr. Grant's every move, feeling grateful that she had called him. The girl, though weak and visibly frightened, seemed to draw strength from Dr. Grant's calm presence. She tried to keep her eyes open, focusing on his words. "You're doing great," he said with a small smile, giving her shoulder a light squeeze. "Just hold on a little longer." The mother, seeing her daughter respond, reached for her daughter's hand, her own hands trembling. It was clear that this was the first time she'd felt any sense of relief all night. Nana noticed a few other nurses standing near the door, watching silently. Their expressions held a mix of admiration and quiet relief. They had all felt the same frustration with Dr. Hayes over the years, and tonight felt like a moment of change. They respected Dr. Grant's ability to step in so gracefully, ignoring the risks and focusing only on what truly mattered. As they worked, Nina noticed Dr. Hayes still standing nearby, clearly trying to hold onto his pride, but his eyes betrayed him. It was as if he was realizing, perhaps for the first time, that his actions had not only hurt this family, but also damaged the trust of those around him. He stood there, watching Dr. Grant handle the situation with such care, and for the first time, he looked uncertain. Dr. Grant continued treating the girl, his hands steady and his focus unwavering. He calmly explained each step to the mother, making sure she understood what was happening and what to expect. Nina could tell that his gentle approach was helping the mother feel involved and informed, something she so desperately needed. Each word he said was like a lifeline, keeping her grounded as her daughter received the care she needed. Nina found herself deeply moved by the situation. She'd been a nurse for a few years now, but this was the first time she'd been part of something so intense, so raw. This was about more than just medicine. This was about human connection, about dignity, about courage. She felt a renewed sense of purpose in her work, and in that moment, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Finally, as Dr. Grant completed the immediate care, he looked at the mother and gave her a reassuring nod. She's stable now. We'll keep a close eye on her, but she's responding well. The mother's eyes filled with tears as she hugged her daughter, feeling an enormous weight lift off her shoulders. She looked at Dr. Grant, her voice shaky but filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes expressing the depth of her relief. Dr. Grant gave her a small, kind smile, simply nodding in acknowledgement. Nina felt a lump in her throat as she watched this moment unfold. She looked around the room, noticing the quiet but powerful respect in the eyes of the other nurses and staff. It was as though they had all just witnessed something that would stay with them for a long time, a reminder of why they had chosen this profession. As they left the room, Nina felt a sense of quiet pride. She had stood up for what was right, even when it wasn't easy. And in doing so, she had helped change the course of one family's life. As Dr. Grant left the treatment room to update the mother on her daughter's progress, Nina followed him, feeling a quiet relief wash over her. The girl was now stable, and the tension from earlier had faded. But as they stepped into the hallway, they saw Dr. Hayes standing there, his face set in a mixture of anger and frustration. Nina felt her heart skip a beat. She knew this might not end here, and the confrontation she had been trying to avoid was now right in front of them. Dr. Hayes walked up to them, his tone cold and sharp. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, directing his question more to Dr. Grant than to Nina. But it was clear he held both of them responsible for what had happened. Nina felt her face flush, but she held her ground, standing close to Dr. Grant for support. Dr. Grant, however, didn't seem fazed by Dr. Hayes' tone. He calmly replied, "I was doing my job. The girl needed help, and I was available." His voice was steady, and he looked Dr. Hayes directly in the eyes, showing no hint of apology or regret. Dr. Hayes scoffed, glancing at Nina before turning his gaze back to Dr. Grant. "I made the call on that case. You had no business getting involved," he snapped, clearly irritated that his authority had been questioned. Nina wanted to speak up, to defend herself and Dr. Grant, but before she could, Dr. Grant continued in a calm, respectful voice. "With all due respect, she was in serious condition, and I couldn't ignore that." His tone was firm but professional, leaving no room for argument. Nina felt a surge of admiration for him, realizing how courageously he was handling the situation. Dr. Hayes' face tightened, and for a moment, Nina thought he might argue further. But the sound of footsteps interrupted them as a few other nurses approached, likely curious about the raised voices in the hallway. Dr. Hayes seemed to notice their presence, and his expression shifted slightly. It was as if he realized he was being watched, that people were noticing his reaction. Seeing the shift, Dr. Grant kept his tone calm, but his words were strong. "We're here to help every patient, no matter who they are. I hope we can agree on that," he said, looking directly at Dr. Hayes, whose expression grew more uncomfortable. Dr. Hayes didn't respond, his face a mix of frustration and something close to embarrassment. He quickly muttered something under his breath and walked away, disappearing down the hallway. Nina let out a small breath, feeling the tension finally lift. She looked at Dr. Grant, her eyes filled with gratitude and respect. "Thank you," she said softly, genuinely moved by his support and his courage to stand up for what was right. Dr. Grant gave her a reassuring smile, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing, Nina. Don't ever forget that." As he walked away, Nina felt a deep sense of validation. She had doubted herself, worried about going against Dr. Hayes' orders, but now she knew that following her instincts had been the best choice. The other nurses gave her encouraging nods, their faces showing the same respect she felt for Dr. Grant. For Nina, this moment wasn't just about standing up to Dr. Hayes or about saving one patient. It was about proving, both to herself and to everyone around her, that compassion and courage had a place in their work. She had made a difference, however small, and she knew she would carry this lesson with her in every shift, every patient, and every challenge she faced from this moment on. The hallway was quiet again as Dr. Hayes walked away, leaving Nina standing there with a mix of emotions swirling inside her. She felt a sense of relief, pride, and a strange sadness, all at once. Though she was grateful that Dr. Grant had stood by her, she couldn't help but think about how things had gone with Dr. Hayes. This was the first time she had openly gone against him, and she wondered what it might mean for her future at the hospital. As she turned to go back to her duties, one of her fellow nurses approached her with a warm smile. "You did good, Nina," she said, her tone encouraging. "A lot of us would have done the same, but you actually took that step. That took real courage." Hearing this made Nina's chest swell with pride. It was reassuring to know that others understood and supported her. She had only been doing what she felt was right, but knowing her colleagues felt the same way brought her a new sense of confidence. Maybe this was a step towards something better for all of them. Later that evening, as she checked on the young girl, Nina felt a calm wash over her. The girl looked much better now, resting peacefully with her mother by her side. The mother looked up as Nina entered the room and gave her a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she whispered, reaching out to touch Nina's hand. "You saved her life tonight. I don't know what we would have done without you." Nina felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't done it for praise or recognition, but hearing the mother's words reminded her why she had chosen this path in the first place. She smiled back, giving the woman's hand a gentle squeeze. "We're just glad she's doing better. That's what matters." As she left the room, Nina felt an even deeper sense of purpose. This experience had strengthened her resolve to put her patients first, no matter the obstacles. She knew there might be consequences for defying Dr. Hayes, but now she was sure she could face whatever came next. Her heart was lighter, filled with a quiet courage she hadn't felt before. Over the next few days, whispers about the incident spread among the hospital staff. People spoke about Dr. Grant's bravery in stepping in, about Nina's courage to call him, and about Dr. Hayes' attitude. Word had even reached the higher-ups, who were known to value professionalism and patient care. Nina noticed a shift in the air, a silent but powerful reminder to everyone that they were here to help, not to judge. Nina felt proud to have played a role in this change. Her coworkers began to approach her more often, sharing their own experiences and frustrations, some even seeking her advice. She hadn't realized how much impact a single act of courage could have, not just on a single patient, but on the entire team. Her quiet stand had rippled out in ways she hadn't expected. One evening, as Nina was finishing up her shift, Dr. Grant passed by and gave her a quick nod. "Keep doing what you're doing, Nina," he said with a smile. "The place needs more people like you." She nodded back, feeling both inspired and supported. She knew there was still a long way to go, but she also knew she wouldn't be walking that path alone. Leaving the hospital that night, Nina looked up at the sky, feeling a sense of peace and purpose she hadn't known before. She felt ready to face whatever challenges came her way, knowing she had chosen a path of integrity and compassion, one that could make all the difference, one patient at a time. The days after the incident brought a quiet but noticeable change in the hospital. Staff members seemed more alert, more attentive to each patient's needs. There was an unspoken understanding that the kind of care Dr. Grant had provided was now the standard everyone wanted to uphold. Nina felt proud to be a part of this shift, knowing that her actions had helped spark it. However, she was also aware of the tension with Dr. Hayes. Although he hadn't spoken to her directly since that night, she noticed the way he would look at her, sometimes with irritation, sometimes with a hint of something that almost looked like regret. Nina wasn't sure if he had come to understand his mistake, or if he was just annoyed that someone had challenged him. Either way, she kept her focus on her work, refusing to let his attitude shake her. One afternoon, while Nina was organizing supplies, she overheard two nurses talking in low voices. They were discussing how Dr. Hayes had been called into a meeting with the hospital administration. The nurses speculated that he might have to answer for his behavior, especially after Dr. Grant's intervention had highlighted the incident. Nina felt a mixture of relief and nervousness. She didn't want to be the reason for any kind of trouble, but she also knew that accountability was important. Later that day, Nina saw Dr. Hayes walking down the hallway, his face tight with frustration. He walked right past her without a word, and she felt a pang of uncertainty. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong, but she wondered if he blamed her for the situation he was now facing. It was a strange feeling, knowing she had done what was right, but still feeling the weight of the consequences. That evening, Dr. Grant approached her in the break room. His calm presence was reassuring, and he gave her a small smile. "I heard about the meeting today," he said, keeping his voice low. "You don't need to worry. This isn't on you. If anything, this was long overdue." Nina nodded, grateful for his words. She had been carrying a small amount of guilt, worried that her actions had somehow caused trouble for Dr. Hayes. But hearing Dr. Grant's reassurance helped ease her mind. She realized that standing up for what was right sometimes meant facing uncomfortable situations, but that didn't mean she was in the wrong. "I just want things to be better here," she said quietly. "For the patients and for everyone who works here. It shouldn't be so hard to put people first." Dr. Grant nodded, understanding. "That's exactly why you're here, Nina. And don't forget, you're not alone in wanting that. Sometimes, it only takes one person's courage to bring change." His words stayed with her, giving her a renewed sense of purpose. As the week went on, Nina noticed small but positive shifts in the hospital environment. Her fellow nurses seemed more open to voicing their thoughts and concerns, and the doctors appeared more attentive to the needs of each patient. It was a subtle transformation, but it was real, and Nina knew it wouldn't have happened if she hadn't spoken up. One day, as she was preparing to leave after a long shift, Dr. Hayes walked up to her. He hesitated for a moment, as if unsure of what to say, then finally spoke in a low voice. "I know we've had our differences," he said, avoiding her gaze. "But I can see that. You care about what you do. That's something we need more of here." Nina was taken aback, surprised by his words. She didn't know what to say, but she managed a small nod. "Thank you," she replied softly, sensing that this was his way of making peace. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was a step, and she respected him for it. As she left the hospital that evening, Nina felt a sense of closure. She realized that by following her heart, she had not only helped a patient in need, but had also become a part of something bigger. She had shown others that compassion was at the core of their work, and she hoped that this was just the beginning of a more caring and supportive hospital for everyone. As days turned into weeks, Nina continued to notice positive changes around the hospital. Her colleagues seemed more confident, more open about discussing issues that had once been ignored. She could see a new sense of pride in their work, and it gave her a quiet satisfaction to know that her actions had helped spark this shift. One afternoon, as Nina was preparing for her rounds, she noticed a familiar face in the waiting area. It was the young girl she and Dr. Grant had saved, along with her mother. They were talking softly, and the girl looked much healthier and happier than before. Seeing them brought a huge smile to Nina's face. She walked over, and the mother's face lit up when she saw her. "Nina," the mother exclaimed, reaching out to take her hands. "We wanted to come by and thank you personally. My daughter wouldn't be here if it weren't for you and Dr. Grant. We're so grateful." The girl, a little shy but clearly thankful, looked up at Nina with bright eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Nina felt her heart swell, and she knelt down to be at the girl's level. "You're very brave," she said with a smile. "I'm so happy to see you feeling better." The mother handed Nina a small, handmade card. It was decorated with colorful drawings and heartfelt words, expressing their gratitude in a way that felt deeply personal. Nina was touched, and she promised to keep the card as a reminder of why she chose this path. As they said their goodbyes, Nina felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. The simple act of receiving their thanks was more rewarding than any praise or acknowledgement she could get from her peers. It was a moment that validated every choice she had made since that night with Dr. Hayes. It reminded her that her work was about more than just following orders. It was about making a real difference in people's lives. After they left, Nina took a moment to reflect on how far things had come. The incident with Dr. Hayes felt like a turning point, not only for her, but for everyone in the hospital. Her actions had inspired a sense of accountability and compassion that she could see in her colleagues every day. It was as if they all shared a renewed commitment to providing the best care possible, and it filled her with a sense of unity and pride. Later that day, Dr. Grant saw her in the hallway and walked over, noticing the card she was holding. "A thank you card?" he asked with a smile. "Looks like someone's made an impact." Nina laughed softly, a little embarrassed, but she held up the card with pride. "It's from the little girl we treated. They came by just to say thank you." Dr. Grant nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's why we do this, isn't it? Those moments remind us of what matters." Nina couldn't agree more. She realized that the work she did, no matter how challenging or exhausting, was worth it for moments like these. It wasn't about recognition or praise. It was about helping people in their most vulnerable moments. Knowing that she had made a difference, even in just one family's life, was enough. As she continued her shift, Nina felt lighter, more certain than ever about her role. She was no longer just a nurse doing her duty. She was someone who cared deeply about each patient who came through the doors. Her journey with Dr. Grant had shown her that courage and compassion could change lives, not just for the patients, but for everyone involved. And for Nina, that was the greatest reward of all. In the days that followed her encounter with the young girl and her mother, Nina's confidence grew stronger. She felt she was part of something meaningful, something bigger than just her day-to-day tasks. Her experience with Dr. Grant and the courage it had inspired in her made her more determined to uphold the values she believed in. She knew that the hospital's atmosphere was changing, and she could sense a newfound respect from her colleagues. Even those who had once been hesitant to challenge the usual routine were now showing a willingness to speak up and prioritize patient care. One evening, as her shift was nearing its end, Nina found herself once again face-to-face with Dr. Hayes in the break room. This time, however, he seemed different. There was no trace of the cold, dismissive tone he had used before. Instead, he looked at her with a thoughtful expression, as if weighing his words carefully. "Can I talk to you for a moment, Nina?" he asked, his voice quiet and calm. Surprised but curious, Nina nodded. She could feel a slight tension, wondering what this conversation would bring. Dr. Hayes took a deep breath and glanced down, almost as if he was gathering his thoughts before speaking. "I want to be honest," he began. "I was taken aback by how you went about things with that young patient. At the time, I felt undermined. I've been working here a long time, and I thought I had a good grasp of what was best in each situation." He paused, his expression softening. "But seeing how the team responded to what you and Dr. Grant did, it's made me rethink a few things." Nina listened carefully, realizing that he was making a genuine effort to explain himself. She could sense that this was not easy for him, and it took a moment for her to find the right words to respond. "I understand, Dr. Hayes," she replied gently. "It wasn't my intention to go against you or challenge your authority. I'd only wanted to make sure the patient received the care she needed." She paused, choosing her words thoughtfully. I've come to believe that sometimes we have to take those extra steps, even if they're difficult, to ensure we're doing the right thing for the people who trust us with their lives. Dr. Hayes nodded, his gaze fixed on the floor for a moment. You're right. I see that now. I've been so focused on routine and following protocol that I forgot about the importance of flexibility and compassion in our work. His eyes met hers, filled with a sincerity she hadn't seen before. Thank you, Nina, for reminding me of what really matters. Nina felt a wave of relief and gratitude. She hadn't expected Dr. Hayes to have this change of heart, but hearing him speak so openly was a powerful moment. She realized that even the most experienced professionals sometimes needed a reminder of why they had chosen this path. As she left the break room, Nina felt a renewed sense of purpose. Not only had she managed to bring positive changes to the hospital, but she had also helped someone as experienced as Dr. Hayes reconnect with the deeper meaning of their work. It was a reminder that growth and learning never stopped, no matter how many years one had spent in the profession. That night, as she walked through the hospital corridors, Nina felt a quiet satisfaction. She knew there would always be challenges, but she also knew that she was now better equipped to face them. Her journey had taught her that courage and compassion could inspire change, not only in herself, but in others as well. And as she passed by patients and colleagues, she felt proud of the small but meaningful difference she was making, one step at a time. As the weeks continued to pass, the atmosphere in the hospital became more positive. Staff members were more engaged, and patients felt the warmth of the care they received. Nina couldn't help but feel proud of how much things had changed since that fateful night when she stood up to Dr. Hayes. Her confidence had grown, and she knew she was making a real difference in the lives of her patients and the morale of her team. One day, while she was on her break in the break room, Nina overheard two nurses discussing how they could improve patient care even further. They were brainstorming ideas about better communication among the staff and how to implement regular meetings to discuss patient needs. Nina smiled to herself, thinking about how much everyone was willing to contribute to making the hospital a better place. Feeling inspired, she decided to join the conversation. I love what you're both discussing, she said, walking over. It's important that we all feel comfortable sharing our thoughts on how to improve care. Maybe we could organize a meeting where everyone can bring up ideas and concerns. The nurses nodded enthusiastically, and they quickly began to plan a time to gather their colleagues. Nina felt a rush of excitement as they talked. This was the kind of initiative that could lead to lasting changes, and she was thrilled to be a part of it. Later that week, they held their first meeting. Staff members gathered in a conference room, sharing their ideas and concerns openly. Nina took notes, eager to ensure that everyone felt heard. She was amazed at how willing her colleagues were to share their experiences. They discussed the importance of empathy in patient care and how they could create an environment where every patient felt valued and respected. As the meeting came to a close, Nina suggested they create a bulletin board in the staff room where everyone could post their thoughts and ideas at any time. This way, we can keep the conversation going, she explained. It doesn't have to wait for our meetings. The idea was met with cheers, and soon, everyone was excitedly discussing what they could put on the board. The sense of camaraderie among the staff was palpable. Nina felt a warmth in her heart, knowing that they were all working toward a common goal, providing the best care for their patients. Over the next few weeks, the bulletin board became a focal point for the staff. Ideas flowed freely, and it sparked discussions that led to practical changes in their daily routines. Nina felt fulfilled, seeing the impact of their efforts in the smiles of their patients and the enthusiasm of her colleagues. One afternoon, while she was on her shift, Nina noticed Dr. Hayes looking at the bulletin board with a thoughtful expression. He seemed to be taking in the ideas and suggestions that had been posted. It was a sight she hadn't expected to see, and it filled her with hope. Dr. Hayes, Nina said, approaching him with a friendly smile. What do you think of the ideas on the board? He turned to her, a hint of surprise on his face. I'm impressed, honestly. I didn't realize how many great ideas were coming from the staff. It seems everyone is eager to improve things around here. He paused, a thoughtful look crossing his face. I might have underestimated the value of listening to you all. Nina felt a sense of accomplishment. It's all about working together and keeping the lines of communication open, she replied. I think we're really starting to create a more positive environment for everyone. Dr. Hayes nodded, a smile breaking through his serious demeanor. You've done an amazing job, Nina. It's clear that your leadership has made a difference. As she returned to her duties, Nina felt lighter. The respect between her and Dr. Hayes was growing, and she knew that together they could continue to foster a culture of compassion and care. With each passing day, she was reminded of the power of unity and how every voice mattered in creating a better workplace. Looking around at her colleagues, she felt grateful to be part of this team. The changes they were making together were not just improving the hospital, they were changing lives, and that was the heart of what she had always wanted to achieve.